Welcome once again to the People of the Free Gift podcast, where we ground believers in their identity in Christ and equip them to reach out to those caught in religion. We're glad you joined us. Welcome once again to the People of the Free Gift podcast, where we ground believers in their identity in Christ and equip them to reach out to those caught in religion. We're glad you joined us.
And then my cousin that lived there in Pendleton, she'd have been 19, I think, at the time. It was a year after she graduated. She started, she'd come over and visit, and she started changing how she looked. And she was wearing skirts and stuff. And my sister, who was a year older than me, she'd go over and visit her a little bit more. She had an apartment with her roommate was Pentecostal. Of course, we didn't get all of this until, it starts tying in, and my aunt gets really upset. Not that I blame her. And because her daughter basically was converted over to being a Pentecostal, and of course they couldn't understand. And the problem with, you'd say, oh, well, at least, they're going to church, what's the big deal? Well, the problem is she would come home and tell her mom and her dad that, well, because you guys are not part of the UPC, and they're Christians, they're just not that, you're going to go to hell. She told her sister, she just... talk about havoc, Yeah. And so she'd say little things to us. And I remember she invited me to a service. It was kind of a youth one, but anyway. And she invited my sister. And it was, of course, they really did during worship, sometimes they kind of run around, or sometimes they'll call it like a spiritual dance, but they were like running in the spirit and different things. Kind of, eye-popping a little bit, And anyway, she was hoping that we would want to go, and we kind of shied away. Well, then when I started dating my first husband, of course, he says, well, I was raised Pentecostal. And I kind of got, because it was the same church, and I kind of got the connection, but he wasn't really following their beliefs at the time. He was in the military the first year, and here he'd come home on leave and he's smoking and cigarettes, and so he wasn't like he was really following it. So it wasn't like a big connection at the time. Even with that, I guess when I noticed it, his parents asked me if I'd go to church with them on a Sunday, and I said, well, okay, I'll go with you. His mom was a really nice lady, and anyway, I used to enjoy hanging with her, so I said, all right, we'll go, and that's the first exposure that I had to it. Was just a little bit kind of visiting. And granted, there's things that they do that you wouldn't see in another church, so it's a little eye-popping there. But other than that, there wasn't anything that stood out glaring like, oh, this is bad, And so when we got married, though, the pastor, when I watched the tape afterward, especially because I wasn't really listening, nervous at the time, some of the things he said, of course, my mother picked up on it, and she was offended. He said something about how Richard will please bring, Pamela to, I can't remember if he said the true salvation, or anyway, there were things you really shouldn't have said at a wedding where it was kind of rude, I thought, but looking back, and so there were little things. But again, because my husband at the time wasn't, you'd ask him if he was a Christian, he believed in God. Well, yeah, but then he'd make jokes like, well, I'm kind of backslid right now, because his family, he'd come home on leave, and of course having that outside exposure, your kids are going to change a little, and they'd be bothered by this, so they'd make their comments. Oh, you're becoming a backslider. Oh, have you found a Pentecostal church down there? Which he did. He was in Florida for the first couple of years he was in the service, and he did find a church, I guess he'd go to some, but they'd always want to know, and really keep up on that, and kind of give him heck for changing a little. Anyway, it wasn't until he came back from the service, and we were in the area about 4 months before we moved up to Montana. And at that time, we went a couple times with him. Not real consistent. And I'm not sure really why, but I don't really remember anything at that time, again, though standing out as complete different, because we were still probably treated as, at least I was, as a visitor, so they didn't try any of their indoctrinating or anything. And then we, of course, moved up here to Montana, to Miles City, and we'd come home to visit. And I remember, we'd go a few times. And like in the summer, we'd come to visit, and they always seemed really happy. They'd have these potlucks, like a big luncheon thing. And at that, even though it seemed odd, you'd see these women in skirts and stuff, and they'd play like baseball or and you're kind of surprised because of course most of us would probably go put on a pair of shorts and t-shirt or sportswear. Of course they didn't, and the men didn't wear t-shirts. Like you're wearing a polo shirt, completely modest, but not in their eyes.
Yeah.
Because of the sleeves are up to above your elbow. Of course, they needed to be down to your wrist. And so, things like that you would notice, of course, at these gatherings. But other than that, everyone seemed pretty friendly, happy. Well, when we moved back, and that's when we started actually going to the church. His parents said, "Oh, come with us." So we did. And that's when I first noticed the problems because it was probably about the third Sunday, and I want to say, and they said, well, can we do Bible study in your home? Oh, okay. Of course, my husband, he was offended a little bit for a totally different reason. Well, I was raised in the church. What are you going to tell me that I don't know? Why do I, which I could have maybe looking back understand because in their eyes, he was probably a backslider. And so they were treating him a little bit that way and it made him mad. And he had grown a mustache. This is kind of aside from this, but I remember one time we were, and this is after we had been in there for a while and then we left. And we were at, it was on a Saturday and we pulled into an ATM to get some cash out and we're going to yard sale and do some fun stuff, And he saw one of I wasn't sure if it's a deacon, but it was someone that had been in the church a very long time when he was raised in it. Anyway, and he comes over to the car. Oh, hi, how you doing? And of course he had his facial hair, his mustache. I think we were assemblies by then. And he says to him, well, I see you, I can't remember how he put it, but something about, I see you've got facial hair, and just kind of starts confronting him. And we haven't, why would you, that's just odd to do that to anybody. Yeah. And of course he had on like a t-shirt, summer clothes. I can't remember if he had shorts on, but I know he had a t-shirt. So he said something about that, something about the facial hair. And then, of course, my husband was irritated and he said, well, the way I believe now, I don't think I need to worry about that. And he started to try to witness to about assemblies, saying how, he said, you're just trying to pull legalism on me. And, kind of got into it a little bit with the guy. And he said a few other things. And the guy got real upset. And he says to him, I don't believe you. I don't believe you just a little bit. And, of course, then we spat off, But, I mean, it was so confrontive. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And it had been, I don't know how long it had been since he talked to the guy, probably since we'd left the church, I guess, but to just walk up and do that to somebody instead of just saying hi and leaving it at that, anyway, but so they started the Bible studies, and that's when I started noticing a problem because they had like a flip chart like you'd use for teaching preschool or kindergarten, first grade, and it had their beliefs on there, so I guess we could really get it, no excuses. You're going to learn it. And they had their idea of course, creation and, and they got into where they talked about the one, God being one, Jesus and God, one God. And I remember saying, well, we believe there's one God. What do you mean we believe in three? Because part of it was they say, well, these other religions believe in three gods. And no, we don't. What do you mean? And so, of course, here starts the debate. And the guy putting on the Bible study was getting a little bit frustrated, trying to explain it, why it's so different. And so I don't see a difference. Or I said, we don't believe in three actual gods up there. You're not telling me anything. So that became a bit of a problem. And then they got on they said, well, how were you baptized? And I said, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. And they said, well, that's not right. It was Jesus only. It didn't count. You weren't really baptized. So then, and I says, well, I feel I was, so I guess I won't worry about it. Well, no. If you were to die tomorrow, you're going to go to hell. You had really better make sure you get in and get baptized. And that's when I started getting more offended because I started bringing up people that, from my past, and I said, well, what do you mean? What about so-and-so? And I said, the Sunday school teacher I had that was really fond of, and I know she was baptized that way. Oh, no, going to hell. I mean, it wouldn't matter what you said unless they were that specific belief and that their form of baptizing, you're going to hell. Period. Didn't matter. And so I said, well, I just don't believe that way. And they kind of got upset. And that was the one Bible study they left. And then the next Bible study, and I can't remember if they were twice a week or once a week, but it was the pastor that came, Mr. Satterwhite, who married me. And, of course, he tried to soften it. Well, I'm not saying the way you were baptized is completely wrong, but now if you look at the Bible, of course, he's trying to show me the Bible verses again and say, this is what it says. I mean, would it really hurt to get rebaptized? I mean, people do that anyway. And, he kind of tried to make the softer approach. And then, I'm trying to remember there was another part that we got on and I said something about, I said, you make it sound like though our faith is always, or our salvation is always in question. I said, what if I left my house in the morning and somebody cut me off and I swore at him in my car and I didn't say forgiveness right away, would I go to hell? And he kind of made it sound like potentially, yeah. Like there was this toss-up. Like basically, if you are not immediately repentant for anything that you do, as we perceive as sin, then going to hell. There's always a slippery slope. Yeah. Always. And that's what you're on. And so there's never an assurance. And so, of course, that bothered me. And then with the whole baptism thing bothered me. And so I think I can't remember if we even had one other session after that or not. And I said, I don't think we're going to do this. And so we ended up, we quit going to that church. And I'm trying to remember, it was around Christmas time. I remember that because it was, when we were it was November when they started the Bible studies. And when we left, it was after Christmas. Might have been January. And when I first started going, what I liked is I think it was the second or third week we were there, they had like a revival. And they had this special guest speaker come. He was from somewhere in the South. And he was actually a pretty nice pastor. And I don't remember him, he didn't preach on all the legalism. He didn't really focus on that. I kind of liked him, and of course a lot of people went forward and there was a lot of there was people slain in the spirit and speaking in tongues, some drunk in the spirit. And I'm not saying that, I know some of it was very real. I mean, some of it you could kind of wonder, but they had this big revival. And a friend of mine that I went to school with, she got really involved during that time. And I think she started about a month before I did. And she liked angels. It was one of she liked to decorate for one. Mm-hmm. And one of her decor of choice was angels. And so you'd go in her house and she'd have the angel statues here and there, and and they told her that it was I don't know if they said sacrilegious or anyway, it was wrong, that she was worshiping angels. And so she brought black garbage bags full of her angel statues and things to the church, and they broke them as a symbol of her letting go of that, sin, I guess. I guess it was sin. So anyway, and then her husband at the time was completely against them. I think he might have tried it a couple times, said, forget this. I mean, the guy had his own problems, I'm not going to deny, but I think he thought, oh boy, what is this? And so he refused to go to the church with her, and my friend and him continued to have more problems, and ultimately she left and divorced him, and they were in approval. Which is odd, because typically most churches will try to say, well, hang on to your marriage, because marriage, a divorce is a sin. But anyway, they were completely okay with her leaving him. And I mean, like I said, he had his own problems. I'm not saying that that was necessarily a completely bad decision, but for them to try to be as involved in it as what they were was not okay. And then, of course, after that, then they'd monitor her on anyone she'd think about dating or anything, they'd get kind of funny. Of course, they were against television. You weren't to have any TV in your house. At Christmas time, they weren't into Christmas trees. Of course, Santa was a no, which is whatever. I mean, a lot of people are not okay with that. But there were things, and then they got to, of course, with the jewelry, they got to where they didn't even want the women to wear their wedding ring, or men.
Wow.
I'm thinking to myself, well, that would put somebody in an awkward situation, perhaps. Why would you even suggest that? But anyway, they said it, I don't know if they thought it was vain. Maybe someone had a, like a fancier ring or something, they thought, oh, well, that's being showy, Maybe they had an engagement ring that had diamonds. I don't remember all of it. I just remember it just seemed to get more legalistic and more legalistic. And I should say, now this is this one particular church, because I have heard from others that they do vary depending on where you go, who the pastor is, and maybe those above him, or I know there are variances, right? Because my first husband's folks told me that the original pastor that got them to go to the Pentecostal church, they were going to a Baptist church, and they had the 3 older girls. They were, I don't know, I think the oldest at that time was 6 or 7, and they ended up going over and playing at the neighbors, and they happened to be Pentecostal, and he was a pastor, and so then they start talking to him, and they want to do Bible study in their house. And my mother-in-law, she was raised Assembly, so for her, it wasn't as a big a stretch, I think. I think she kind of looked at it somewhat the same. But she told me that it took her, once she started the church, until she completely quit cutting her hair and things, and gave up her jeans. I think she said it took her like 7 years before she'd completely not do any of that. But part of that was, at the time, it's almost sounded like the pastor, he wasn't as pushy on all that stuff. It wasn't as pushed on. It was more just belief. And that pastor left. I believe he might have even left the Pentecost. He didn't. He left for another Pentecostal church, I believe, at that time. But I think ultimately he left the Pentecostal faith to preach. I want to say Assembly, but so he didn't agree with all the legalism. Okay. So as I say, I think it depends too on the particular pastor. Right. And the reason I say that too is because there was a church in Hermiston. It was kind of a sister church, I guess, to this one. There was a church in Mountain Freewater, and there was a church, I think they started over in La Grande, Oregon. And there's differences in each one. A little bit, because we went to the Hermiston church for just a little while, and I don't remember them pushing the legalistic stuff as hard in the beginning. And again, that one we only went for 4 months. My husband had gotten upset with the Assembly of God Church. He got into an argument. He worked with the associate or youth pastor at their job, and so they'd get mad, which is just, well, you're not being Christian today. Well, you're really, okay, you're in a workplace, surrounded by people you could really witness to, and they would quibble over beliefs a lot. And anyway, so they'd get in these arguments. So the last big one they got into, my husband comes up and says, we're not going to the church. I am so sick of that guy, blah, 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 And so and then he started going to the Hermiston, because it was closer at that time to us, because we had moved out of Pendleton. And so just to go to church in Pendleton would have taken us over an hour and a half or so to get there on Sundays, and he didn't want to do that, where the Hermiston was like 20 minutes away. Anyway, and so he started going, and we went there about, I want to say 4 or 5 months to that one. And I had finally just said, no, I'm sorry. And the biggest reason was because of the age of the girls, my older 2, you could see where they were going to get confused. Because they liked assemblies. I'd started them in rainbows and, and that's hard on kids when those beliefs are switched around on them, you know. And so I was uncomfortable with that. And then my sister passed away during the time we were at the Hermiston church. And their response to that kind of did it for me. I don't think so. And so then I ended up going myself back to the assemblies. And I think within a month he started going with me again. Because in fact, for a while there with his job schedule, he couldn't always go on Sundays. And so it wasn't really hard for me to just go, I'm not going to go. I'm headed down the other way, you know. Yeah. And so, anyway, that was where I made that split. But I would say that church in Hermiston didn't seem to be even as strict as the one in Pendleton. You could see little differences. So I think each one, and that's a sad thing, so they're kind of going off of their own pastors at the time that they have particular interpretation, which in itself can be kind of scary because, you know, not that, I mean, you should be able to go to your pastor for things. You should, I mean, I believe all that, but at the same time, just like if you told me something and it sounded even questionable and I didn't go for myself and look it up in the Bible and to pray about it, that would be kind of stupid on my part or folly. I mean, you should always, you're still a human. Just because you're a pastor doesn't mean that you're perfect. Absolutely. And so as Christians, you can't just say, oh, well, pastor's got it all figured out for me. I don't have to do anything. I think that's probably a dangerous way to be, you know, some more than others, depending on what church you go to. But, and I think this particular pastor at the Hermiston church, he didn't seem quite as intimidated if people did have a little bit of a different view or questioned. He seemed okay with, and I'm not saying that he necessarily believed what you said or agreed with you, but he was like, oh, okay. He wasn't quite so tenacious about it. No, you will see my way. Where the other one, I would say, was a lot more that way, tenacious with it. He wouldn't let it go. And so, like, the experiences that I had, there are some differences, of course, just even within the churches themselves. But of course, the other thing, too, I haven't been on Facebook in quite a while and looked up some of these people, but if you do look, I know here a couple of years ago when I was on there were several of the young kids that I remember that were just a little bit older than my daughters that have left the church. And several have said they're atheists now, which is really too bad. That's the saddest part.
Yeah. Somebody, I heard them refer to that as a scorched earth policy, meaning that unfortunately in these kind of groups and the other, LDS, name it, where that whenever they say we are the one true church, we're the only ones who are doing it the right way, and so salvation has to be through here. So then if somebody leaves that church, Jesus goes with them.
Yeah.
And they mentally can't conceive of there being a way to believe in Jesus without believing in that church.
Yeah. My husband's, I keep saying ex-husband, but his younger brother, who's 2 years younger than him, was that way. In fact, Michael was 2 years older than me in school, a year older. And we used to hang out with him more, my sisters and I, a little bit. And I can remember in high school, he got to where he would go with his family, but only once in a while. They were upset about it because I know previous to that, they would make the kids go.
Right.
I mean, my husband told me stories of them like dragging the girls when they were teenagers to the car. You're going, you don't have a choice. This is just the way it is, you know. But when Michael, of course, he was the baby of the family, when he really kept putting up a barrier, I don't want to go, there were times they would let him choose that. And he completely, you would ask him about beliefs, and he would say, it was interesting because he'd say, well, if I go to any church, I'll probably just go back to the Pentecostal, but I'm just not into that right now. It's not me. It was odd, like you say. It was almost like he couldn't open himself, because we invited him to youth group, to our Assembly God youth group, and he did go to a couple functions we had. But then he just kept saying, well, I just don't believe the way they're saying. I just don't think about that. I mean, you know, like for our youth leader, his wife, of course, had jeans on, and I mean, obviously they're not Pentecostal. And he'd say, well, look at your leader. He wasn't dressed holy or with standards. I can't remember how the words he used, but and so he kept wanting to pick things. So it was funny because in his mind he had chose to leave and didn't believe it, but yet he believed it. I mean, it's a hard, he just said, well, I'm a transgressor, I guess. And in fact, his mother, before him and his wife, they lived together for, I want to say, 2 years, year and a half or something before they wed. And she just flogged him over that. You're a transgressor. And then he'd have something happen. Let's say he had some tires go out and he had to go buy tires. And then I remember he'd get, one time, this particular situation, he was worried he couldn't pay his car insurance that month. And so he went to his folks and said, hey, this is what happened, can I get a little help to pay my car insurance? She got mad and said, well, what do you think is going to happen? Life of a transgressor is hard. And I don't care what, she did it to us a little bit, I remember one time we had our alternator go out in the car. Well, yep, see, life of a transgressor is hard. Or she'd get on us, if you don't pay your tithes. Well, God will get it another way out of you. That's what she used to say. So basically, like, if you don't pay, you're going to pay in another way. Like, you'll have a medical bill come up, or you'll have, something really bad happen.
God getting out of you. That's the hospital getting out of you.
Yeah, but that is their mentality.
No, I know.
When we did go strong and we pay, she would question, not like it was probably any of their business, but they would say, well, did you pay your tithes? Well, yeah. Of course, and she's not the only one. I've had other people do that too. In fact, a big argument, they used to say, well, you give unto Caesar what's Caesar's, and then you give, meaning you take, after the taxes are out, that's the part that you would base your tithe on. And others say, oh no, it's on gross. And they argue and they yell, and okay. But, which is bad because it leaves kind of a bad taste in the mouth over the whole thing. But anyway, they would say those statements. And in fact, I read on your article, and you had quoted somebody that said about the backslide comment. And I can remember hearing that all the time. In fact, I do remember that in the sermons. They would preach about backsliders. They would, one in particular did talk about Assembly of God. I remember that at one sermon.
Assemblies of God. I was just going to ask, don't they talk in that terminology too?
A little bit, not as bad.
So I know that they can lose their salvation. My uncle was ordained with the Assemblies of God for a while, and we got into conversations about whether you can lose your salvation and those kind of things. And he talked about, backsliding and versus actual, apostasy kind of thing. Yeah.
Yep. I know that and I even struggle with this, I suppose, too. You think, well, if somebody says let's say somebody was saved, but then their life doesn't reflect it. And people say, well, what if they just went through the motions? Like it wasn't all the way through, maybe. And so then, or they'll say, well, they're riding on the fence. Meaning they can go this way or this way, and you hear a lot of that. I've even heard that some Baptists a little bit, which is odd because normal people make the joke, oh, once saved, always saved, about Baptists. But I've even heard Baptists talk about that, where if somebody maybe didn't mean it, and that's therefore why their life is what it is, But
there are a lot of legalistic Baptists too.
Yeah. And so, and it is hard because when you have that background like I have, where, of course, Baptist, and somewhat strict, and then you have, in fact, I can remember in school, when we first moved over there, they had junior high dances, and they were just right after school. Like they'd have school get out an hour early, but you didn't leave. You could go to these little dances. And, of course, everybody was scared, and they just kind of sit there. And my guess is the school did this to prepare us for high school so that we would maybe, in their mind, know how to socialize and go to the high school dances and different things. Because all the teachers were there, and you just kind of sit there, and I think they had refreshments. And, my mother got upset about it and said, well, we don't believe in dancing. They shouldn't have that. That should be totally extracurricular, not during school time. She felt that was wrong. And she had this big fit over dances. You can't go, if you're 16, then you can go to a dance, then you could date. That's it. No, nothing, of course, junior high, you're not 16. And so she had issue with that. And sometimes card playing, she'd get frustrated. My dad loved cards, loved pinochle, and he'd show us different games. And there was times she'd get, well, too much of that now. And the only thing I could think of is that was some of that maybe old Baptist. I don't know. Mm-hmm. You look at the games people play now and the time they waste on them. I mean, Yeah. And card, unless you're playing for money, I guess card game pretty tame. But of course, then with assemblies, like you say, then they have their set and their way of things of, well, this person may not be saved because look what he's doing, or in fact, I can remember when we went to youth group, we were going to go to, this was for the assemblies there, and they had a big youth convention in Salem, and of course we had, I want to say 25 kids, I think, that were going to go, signed up, and they needed to have enough chaperones. And one guy, him and his wife, had chaperoned before, but then there was people that had a problem because he still smoked. He hadn't given up cigarettes. And so they said, well, we don't know if they want him to be a chaperone. It's kind of mean, but okay. Afraid maybe that he would influence us if we happened to see him smoking behind the bus, I guess. And then, of course, if he needed a cigarette at all at church, I can remember they had this side door in the back that if you were a smoker, you could go out and have your little cigarette hidden, of course, from the front, which, I mean, in good taste, I'd say, because I have been by churches, and I don't know if you've seen this, where church service lets out, everyone goes out in there. To me, I think that's a little tacky, but that's just me. I'm not saying they're wrong. It's just tacky. Yeah. But, but they were on that. They felt he was wrong, that he was still living in sin, and he hadn't surrendered it, I guess. And so they didn't want that. I remember there was this controversy whether or not he could be one of the chaperones, his wife and him. And they were like in their 50s, probably would have been a good age. But anyway, ultimately he didn't get to chaperone, and that was because of the cigarettes. And then, of course, in the Pentecostal, you really saw, one of the services I went to, and this is when I was probably considered, I'd say, a visitor. I had makeup on a little bit. And during worship, I think I kind of teared up a little bit. And so I had a little bit of mascara right here, and I'm fixing it. And these two gals in front of me are like, cackling about, oh, look, because she's wearing makeup. And they'd have names for women, but, don't paint yourself up like a Jezebel. Don't, just because you happen to wear makeup, they made it sound like you were, a whore or something. It was, the correlation there is odd, for sure. The one of the things, though, I will say with that particular Pentecostal church, when my mother-in-law passed away, they didn't really give a lot of support to my father-in-law over. I mean, initially the funeral was great. They did fine there. But then it seemed like they didn't offer a lot of support, and it kind of hurt his feelings. And so I know he had a lot of frustration toward God too over it. She died in a car accident. He was driving, and so he kind of had gone through a hardship there. You'd think that they would have maybe been more in tune, but they weren't. But I do remember, and I don't remember if they asked him of it or if he just gave it, but he had received some insurance money, and I remember he tithed on it. A goodly amount, because they had said something about needing a furnace, and so they were nice at that point, and then all of a sudden it was, and I shouldn't say that, but really it makes you wonder. I mean, just it seemed odd, because then here they would notice, I mean, anyone that knew the struggles he was having, missing her, and then the guilt because he was the driver. He was having a lot of nightmares about it. In one nightmare he said a snake came up, and I can't remember if he said it bit her in the hand, or it was like the devil taking her from him, and he was really having a struggle, and they didn't seem to help him. And I mean, here he'd been to the church for 40 years or something. I mean, that's crazy to then just have fun dealing with that big problem. And so he backed off, and interestingly enough, of course, we were going to assemblies, and he started coming to church sometimes with us. But then he would question. He'd go to the service, and then he'd go out for dinner or something, afterward. And well, I don't know if I believe da 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 da, or the pastor said this, and actually it contradicts what we believe, because he was pretty good. That is one thing I will say, is they do a lot of memorizing of scripture, you know, things that all people, I think, even Baptists used to do a lot more. We probably should more, because it's, if you don't know what the Bible says, it's pretty hard to tell somebody what to believe, or you know, to be a good witness. But and they were really good at the Bible. In fact, my ex-husband, he could, a lot of things he remembered, quotes. But unfortunately, they can use that for bad, too. I mean, you know. But anyway, they'd come with us once in a while. This is even before his mom passed away. She'd come just to visit us every once in a while. So they'd come to church with us, and we'd go to dinner. And she'd question, and he'd question. And then after she passed, he'd come more, and he'd question, but less. I mean, he almost seemed like, wait a minute. You know, he started realizing maybe that he was kind of lied to on things. And then I had told you my husband's younger brother, you know, had stepped away. Well, when he finally went back to church, it was through an Assembly of God. And he's, in fact, Assembly of God pastor now over there. And anyway, and so his dad goes to the church with him. He doesn't, I mean, every once in a while he could go say hi and talk to a few of the people, but not much, because they're funny that way, you know, that he had gone to church all those years with. But he really walked away from the church over that after his wife died. So, anyway, kind of to me, if it's such a grounded, solid belief, you wouldn't think you would see so much of that, you know, the indecision that people end up having, and confusion, and then of course leaving the church, like you said, kind of do or die. Oh well, can't make it work at this church, won't bother to go to the other one, and it's really too bad, you know. The pastor, his wife passed away of cancer, breast cancer, when his children were all fairly young, and he married the babysitter, I want to say a year later. Not much long. I mean, oddly, you know, which I've never been in that situation. I couldn't tell you how I would be. I'd like to think that it would take me longer than that to get over my husband, but being as I've never been in that situation, I probably shouldn't judge somebody. But it is odd, you know, how some of the things that went on, in particular in that church, you know, and the babysitter was 18 years his junior, I think, quite a bit. And anyway, she left him 7 years ago. Yeah. So, and then the reason I know some of the people, of course, still back there that said something, and it sounds like she kind of went a little crazy afterward, and but then she did end up going to, I think it's an Assemblies that she, and I don't know if she still is. I don't have a lot of contact with her, but anyway, it's interesting. I mean, at least she didn't just say, "Well, forget it." You know, I'm not going to believe anything. But anyway, I mean, divorce can happen, I know, even in any church with pastors, but it's rare.
Yeah.
You know, and so it just kind of raises some eyebrows even with that, you know.
I want to encourage you, if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and share this video with others and this channel with others. It helps every time you do that. It actually helps the channel out financially, and it helps us to grow and get in front of others. If you want to connect with us, we invite you to join the conversation, facebook.com/People of the Free Gift. And until next time, this is Jason from People of the Free Gift, signing off.